Get everything you need for your holiday meal at Whole Foods Market. Right now, you'll find animal welfare certified rib roast on sale. It's a deliciously crowd-pleasing centerpiece. Plus, save on spiral sliced ham, bone-in lamb, and seasonal produce like sweet potatoes and Honeycrisp apples. For ready-to-eat sides, head to the prepared food section. Done. And remember that Whole Foods Market caters. Order gourmet catering at shop.wfm.com. Bring the holiday magic with Whole Foods Market.
Welcome to The Waves, Slate's podcast about gender, feminism, and contemplating the F word all together. It's our final episode. And every episode for the last few years, you've gotten a pair of what we've called feminists to talk about a thing they couldn't get off their minds. But today I'm not going to call myself a feminist. By the way, I'm Cheyna Roth, senior producer at Slate and longtime producer of The Waves. And I'll be joined later in the show by former Waves host June Thomas. She's been a part of The Waves since it was known as XX Gabfest. She's not going to call herself a feminist either. Because really, what even is a feminist? This is our final episode of The Waves, and let me say up top that it has been an absolute privilege to produce this show and to frequently host this show. Those that have listened consistently enough to these episodes know that I have more than once used them as an opportunity to try to sort out my own complex feelings about something. And this last episode is going to be no different. You see, I've been trying to sort out what it means to be a feminist since college. I did this thing for my senior seminar called the Jane Doe Project. I had wanted to put on a production of the Vagina Monologues at my small Christian college, but that got shot down. So I interviewed women from campus who had experienced violence and created this mixed genre play. While the play was mostly focused on violence against women, I brought some levity to the whole thing with sketches about just being a woman. There was a poem about getting hit on using the worst pickup lines I could find. "Are you from Tennessee? 'Cause you're the only 10 I see," still haunts me. And smack dab in the middle of the play was a monologue I wrote for myself called The New Feminist. It was my early 20s attempt to make feminism cool and to try and find my own place in the world. It hit on very small stakes things like wearing high heels and reading Jane Austen, but still believing in women's rights, as though those things were mutually exclusive. I thought it was radical. And maybe in the late 2000s, it kind of was. I mean, this was, after all, the era of America's Next Top Model and tabloid fever consistently dissecting female celebrities. In the time since, we've seen some pretty impressive strides for women. The Me Too movement, the Women's March, a woman finally winning an Oscar for Best Director, more women on the Supreme Court than ever before, and trailblazers from Greta Thunberg to Megan Rapinoe to Roxanna Gay, who, by the way, had a much better title than New Feminist. She called her manifesto Bad Feminist. Forbes had an article declaring the 2010s as the decade women fought back. But now, we're at the end of 2023, and I'm still wondering, what does it mean to be a feminist? Does the word still work? Because despite the strides, you still have plenty of people throwing around the word feminism like it's a joke. And honestly, given all the problems that have arisen within the feminist movement, I can't stop wondering if we should just throw the whole word out altogether. So, in honor of our last episode, I'm going to be joined by a true legend of the waves, and honestly the perfect person to help me sort through all of this. June Thomas is an original host of The Waves, and she's working on a book about lesbian spaces that's due out next year. I'm not going to promise that we'll come to a solution, but we will have lots of interesting thoughts. Stick with us. This episode is brought to you by the Human Rights Campaign, Equality for All without exception. The Human Rights Campaign envisions a world where every member of the LGBTQ+ family has the freedom to live their truth without fear and with equality under the law. Powerful people are bullying LGBTQ+ kids and threatening LGBTQ+ rights, especially targeting transgender and non-binary people. Dozens of states have passed bills to silence and erase the LGBTQ+ community and to ban books about their lives and the lives of civil rights leaders. The Human Rights Campaign is on the front lines, mobilizing to stop dangerous propaganda and stop legislating hate. With more than 3 million members, the Human Rights Campaign is empowering supporters countrywide and providing tools to the community and allies to fight back. By joining the Human Rights Campaign today, your support helps change the narrative and change laws. It's time to make it uncomfortable for those pushing division and hate to hold up LGBTQ+ heroes. Donate today by visiting hrc.org/donation and get your free sticker today. Make a generous gift this giving season and support the LGBTQ+ community, and you'll receive the iconic Human Rights Campaign Equal sticker. This episode is brought to you by Flamingo. Women's bodies are at the center of today's cultural conversations. We face overt regulations that dominate the headlines, but we also face quiet regulations so entrenched in our everyday lives that decisions around our bodies and how we feel about them are no longer ours alone to make. Because so much of what women experience is shrouded in secrecy, treated as an afterthought, or just blatantly ruled by societal expectations and norms, the simple act of exchanging stories becomes the most powerful tool we can use to stay informed. Introducing Unruly, an 8-part podcast from Flamingo highlighting the not often discussed ways women's bodies are subjected to needless oversight. Hosted by writer, curator, and activist Kimberly Drew, Unruly tackles conversations around body neutrality, wellness capitalism, menopause, and more. Because information is power and your body is your business. Unruly is available wherever you get your podcasts. Learn more at shopflamingo.com/unruly. Welcome back to The Waves. I'm Cheyna Roth, and I'm joined now by an original Wavester, a voice that is very familiar to many Slate listeners, June Thomas. Hello, June.
Cheyna, it is so nice to be here, even on a bit of a sad day.
It is a sad day, but we're gonna pump it up because you're here, I'm here. We're gonna make this thing work. There will be no tears.
No.
And to start off with, I have a very easy, simple warm-up question for this episode. I'm joking. You know what the question is. It's not easy. It's existential and very difficult. But we're just going to jump in with it. What is your definition of a feminist?
Well, thanks for starting me off with an easy one, Cheyna. I mean, the fact that you're doing multiple episodes of The Waves on this topic, and here I am tap dancing like mad to avoid answering what is a very straightforward question. Yeah, this is surprisingly difficult to answer. You know, feminism developed through a whole series of people and groups sharing ideas and debating them. It wasn't a top-down situation with an organized party, much less a political party, like coming up with a series of beliefs, and if you agree, you're in. It was more like, these are things we're thinking about that are going to make life better for women, and let's keep coming up with more great thoughts and gathering more supporters and pushing for change. Like, that's how it kind of got going. And so, yeah, there's no agreed upon definition. And I suspect that vagueness has often been intentional. You know, the thinking might be, let's assume that women are feminists until proved otherwise, rather than providing things for people to disagree and distance themselves from. But yes, I know, still not answered. And yeah, I mean, if you Google what do feminists believe, or what is a feminist, or whatever, however you want to put it, there is no set answer. You'll sometimes get these arch definitions like, feminism is the radical belief that women are people, which, like, yeah, but I'm not really sure how helpful that is. So let's get to something concrete. When I was coming up in Britain in the 1970s, there were 7 demands of the women's movement. They were listed in a few places. And these were equal pay, equal education and job opportunities, free 24-hour nurseries, which I'm not sure if that is a word that's typically in use in America, but obviously it's referring to childcare, free contraception and abortion on demand, financial and legal independence, an end to discrimination against lesbians and women's right to define their own sexuality, and finally, freedom from violence and sexual coercion. And, 50 years later, that list, they don't seem all that radical. But at the same time, free abortion on demand, that has clearly not been achieved in the United States and in many other places. And free 24-hour nurseries is also very far off most places in the world. At the same time, that basic sense that, hey, this is about equality and women won't be equal until these conditions apply, that seems really basic and reasonable. So I guess from my point of view, the parts that seem like they're not achievable, at least anytime soon, are anything with the word free attached to it. Ladies, Mr. Capitalism would like to have a word, about your cute little demands.
Yeah, we don't like free things, apparently. But I do like those 7 demands. And I think it's incredibly frustrating that as a pragmatist, I'm over here like, that's a really sweet idea. But good luck, ladies. I mean, to me, feminism is one of those things that the older I get, the more complicated it seems and the harder it feels. Like when I was growing up in the 90s and the aughts, feminism was just girl power. Thank you to my own British experience with the Spice Girls.
Girl power is about being individual, being whoever you want to be, wearing your short skirts, your underbras and your makeup, but having something to say as well.
And now, because I know so much of the world and what's possible, it's about so much more than, girls are just as good as boys. And I also feel like feminist is a word that often gets taken for granted. Like we're all just supposed to know what it means and what counts. But there's a lot of disagreement over the years about what it means to be a feminist and who, for lack of a better word, qualifies. For example, let me ask you this. Can women who are anti-abortion be feminists?
Wow, this is just softball after softball today.
I am here to just cradle you, June.
Okay. So let me admit to something that is slightly embarrassing, but I don't know. It's something I believe in. When I am unsure about a political debate, I remember Sinead O'Connor ripping up that photo of Pope John Paul II at the end of Saturday Night Live.
We find it necessary. We know we will win. We have confidence in the victory of good over evil. Fight the real enemy.
Iconic.
Right? I've held on to that for years. And again, I'm embarrassed, but that is the ultimate test for me in any kind of political debate. If I'm presented with competing positions, I ask myself, who's the real enemy? And I know the word enemy is strong. It feels too contentious. It's like it's ramping things up maybe too much, but I use it because it pushes me to try to figure out who is arguing and why they're arguing, and to try to figure out who has the power in the situation. Because in most cases, that will, help you figure out where you should belong. So let's talk about some of those really tricky questions. Can women who are anti-abortion be feminists? For me, absolutely. Women with a different set of beliefs aren't the enemy. However, having a view is one thing. If those anti-abortion women then take actions to prevent women from getting abortions, that's where things change for me. If they lie about the safety of abortion, if they work to restrict the rights of women who need to end a pregnancy, that is not feminist. I don't know if they still get to call themselves feminists. It's hard to stop them. But to me, that is like a really significant line that has been crossed. If people are listening soon after this comes out, last weekend, there was an outstanding episode of Amicus, Slate's podcast about the law. And it was called Texas Abortion Law's Cruel Outcomes, where Dahlia Lithwick talked to 2 women who've been in court fighting Texas's restrictions on women's reproductive freedoms. And I defy anyone to listen to that and decide that there is any way that a feminist could support those laws. There are conservative men, conservative organizations pushing them. And those people, those forces behind those laws, they simply do not care about the right of women to control their own bodies and their own fertility. To the extent that they think about that, it's that they think the answer is women should not have that power. And that is definitely not feminist.
Yeah. Hard agree. And that hits on a big part of feminism for me, which is that a lot of it is about action and how your actions affect other women and gender minorities. You can personally think that, hey, I wouldn't get an abortion. I think it's wrong to do so. But if you're going around making it hard for me to make medical decisions about my body, well, then we have a problem. And it's the same way with just general ways of living. I mean, I hate when people make the bad faith claim that, well, feminists hate traditional marriage and want all women in the workplace. Like, no, we just want the option for all people. But I truly don't care if you're a woman choosing to stay home with your kids. Honestly, there is a scene in Sex and the City with Charlotte, of all characters, where she yells about this when she decides to quit her job when she gets married. And she's kind of right.
And speaking of not forgetting...
Hello? You were so judgmental at the coffee shop yesterday.
Excuse me?
You think I'm one of those women.
What? One of what women?
One of those women we hate who just works until she gets married.
Charlotte, it's 8:15.
That's not a response.
It's an 8:15 in the morning response.
The women's movement is supposed to be about choice. And if I choose to quit my job, that is my choice.
The women's movement? Jesus Christ, I haven't even had coffee yet.
It's my life and my choice.
But it feels like there are women and people who go sort of way in the opposite direction. I mean, what about the TERFs who call themselves feminists? They are trans exclusionary radical feminists, to be exact, but they don't support trans women.
Yeah, this one is really tricky for me because, you know, there are some conservative trans exclusionary people who are clearly not feminist by any measure, and they would run a mile from that term. And then some of the women who misgender trans women and men, who have zero empathy for trans people, who I'm sure just don't recognize the existence of non-binary people, they are undoubtedly feminists in other ways. You know, they've been involved in feminist causes. They've done the political work. If we're applying litmus tests, they pass until we get to this one topic. And then when it comes to that topic, you know, I just want to tell them that trans people are not the enemy. Expanding the notion of gender, that is not the enemy. And doesn't it worry you that many of the people who work so hard to restrict the rights of trans people are the exact same people who fought and are still fighting to restrict the rights of cis queer people and cis women? So, you know, are those women feminists? Yes, until we get to this one topic. And then they are definitely not. And then I really don't know how to deal with that. That's something that here in Britain there are a lot of feminists who are just have awful views of trans people and anything that challenges the binary. And, you know, I know what I'm about to say is something that makes those feminists crazy, but it seems very clear to me that transphobia is a view that will age very, very poorly. You know, I simply cannot believe that feminists, let's attach one definition, you know, people who believe in the 7 demands that I mentioned earlier could hold onto transphobic views. Or it's possible, I guess, that this is the topic that will lead to a feminist schism, which I guess is always possible. And certainly the religious right would love that. That's kind of what they're hoping for, I think.
Again, it goes back to the Sinead O'Connor rule, which is know the enemy. And if you are dedicating yourself to a cause that your enemy is on board with, I mean, that should be so telling for these people, that if the people that you have been fighting against in all of these other areas are now agreeing with you on this one area, it's like, maybe take a step back. But this isn't the only time that there's been a lot of internal conflict amongst feminists. I mean, we've had multiple waves of so-called feminism. And in every iteration up to, and maybe especially today, there have been disagreements in how to get things done and the belief system. which makes sense because you've got a lot of people and a lot of different ideas to contend with. But I feel like it also makes it really difficult to wrap our arms around a movement. It opens a movement up to a lot of criticism because of that internal conflict. And I talked about this with the amazing NPR political correspondent Danielle Kurtzleben on last week's episode about how when you have these people that are making fun of feminists from within the movement, then the bad actors can really take advantage of that.
I feel like there has been such a wave of the co-opting of valid feminist criticism, of feminists within the movement saying to the movement, hey, our movement has some real problems. It has problems with race. It has problems with class, blah, 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 blah. And all of that criticism is often quite valid, but then often those criticisms get co-opted by people outside the movement. For example, girl boss. I have heard ostensibly progressive men, jokingly say about a powerful or ambitious woman, girl boss, gaslight, gatekeep. And I want to say, shut up. This is not like that. This is not for you to say. This is like, do you know really what you're saying?
And I know you've been looking into this a bit historically for your book. So what are your thoughts on the complications around having one word try to mean so much?
Yeah. So obviously, over the years, there has been pushback, especially from women of color, who sometimes pointed out that what was being called feminism was pretty clearly white feminism because racism wasn't being challenged in this supposedly big umbrella of actions that women were taking. So you had Alice Walker define herself as a womanist in the late 70s, early 80s, and a lot of women of color have embraced that term since then. And I guess generally when splits have happened within the women's movement, it has usually been when a subsection of women have felt that they were being disrespected or worse by others in the movement. So in the 70s, you saw lesbians leaving Now, which at the time, it's a little bit hard to believe at this point, but at the time, Now really was the cutting edge of mainstream feminists. And a whole bunch of women walked away because the leadership was just openly homophobic. Now, in part, that was because they were afraid that they would be dismissed as lesbians, which, now I think, oh, what a great opportunity to challenge homophobia. But, that's asking too much of people 50 years ago. So, no, those women, they kind of they'd internalized that homophobia. And so, so that led to a split. And at the same time, some lesbians split with the early gay liberation movement because they were sick of the guys' sexism. So in those cases, lesbians formed their own lesbian feminist organizations, but they still thought of themselves as feminists and often still joined in feminist campaigns. So to give one concrete example, the Atlanta Lesbian Feminist Alliance, or ALPHA, which had exactly the origin story I just described. It was created by lesbian feminists who were sick of the sexism from men in the Gay Liberation Front and the anti-lesbianism from women in the Atlanta Women's Liberation Group. So they organized their own things. But they also took part in, for example, pro-ERA rallies, and they still went to Pride, with the guys. But they recognized that their priorities didn't align with the priorities of straight women who were terrified of being thought of as lesbians, or the priorities of gay men who were often, had very different concerns from theirs as lesbian women. So they didn't change their belief. They didn't decide that they were no longer feminists. It just that plain feminism, I don't know, plain, but, without any kind of adjective affixed to it, just wasn't their priority anymore.
It is amazing to me how deep the homophobia has run in not just like the feminist movement, but in like people's perception of feminists. Like even when I was growing up, I remember boys, dumb boys, and, just constantly being like, oh, well, if you're a feminist, you're a man-hating lesbian. Like that was like sort of like the big dig. And it's incredible that even within the feminist movement, there wasn't more of an effort to stop that or to say, or as you say, use it as an opportunity to challenge homophobia.
I just think it's one of those things where it's very easy to, kind of forget how much things have changed. I mean, things have changed hugely just in the last 5-10 years. So yeah, 50 years ago, it's very hard to expect people to have had, the same attitudes. We can't expect that. And just using the word feminist, I remember I used to have a little button that had the women's symbol on. Like, people used to treat it like it was so crazy radical, but you know what? It was. There were a lot of laws. There were a lot of restrictions, and many of them still apply. So, it is crazy, and I really, really hope it's changed now. But yeah, it's not that long ago that people had these just pretty awful attitudes.
We're going to take a break here, but if you want to hear more from June and myself on another topic, check out our final Big Tears Slate Plus segment. Today, we're actually going to debate what is the most feminist holiday. I mean, again, should we even be saying feminist? Maybe not. We're still considering the usefulness of the word, but it's going to be a great segment. So please consider supporting the show by joining Slate Plus. Members get benefits like 0 ads on any Slate podcast, no hitting the paywall on the Slate site, bonus content of shows across the Slate network. To learn more about that, go to slate.com/thewaves+. You definitely need to be a member if you want to hear this final Plus segment.
Get everything you need for your holiday meal at Whole Foods Market. Right now, you'll find animal welfare certified rib roast on sale. It's a deliciously crowd-pleasing centerpiece. Plus, save on spiral sliced ham, bone-in lamb, and seasonal produce like sweet potatoes and Honeycrisp apples. For ready-to-eat sides, head to the prepared food section. Done. And remember that Whole Foods Market caters. Order gourmet catering at shop.wfm.com. Bring the holiday magic with Whole Foods Market.
This episode is brought to you by Seed. Seed's DSO1 is a 2-in-1 probiotic and prebiotic designed for whole body health. Formulated with 24 clinically and scientifically studied strains, DSO1 offers benefits in and beyond the gut. See why DSO1 is the probiotic recommended by top doctors and nutritionists. Go to seed.com/Spotify for 25% off Seed's DSO1 Daily Symbiotic.
Welcome back to The Waves. I'm Cheyna Roth. I'm with June Thomas. We're talking about the word feminist. June, should we care about this word feminist? I've had such mixed feelings about it for so long, and it seems like plenty of today's women do too. One minute it's in vogue and you see all these like Instagram feminists with their t-shirts and their hats going on about toppling the patriarchy. And I spoke about that a little bit with Danielle Kurtzleben on last week's episode. But a lot of that seems to have gone away and never really felt that genuine to begin with. I mean, when we get to the everydayness of life, it feels, I don't know, almost silly to say I'm a feminist, or at a minimum, like there's no telling how people are going to react to that word. So, I mean, does it matter what people who think that women should be treated like humans, use a stock Google phrase, should call ourselves?
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, as you said that, I just like when people, I do occasionally come across women who say they're not feminists, and I always, it just always grabs my attention. Sometimes it's because they want to use a more radical word, but sometimes they just don't see it for themselves, and that always shocks me. I'm on the fence about this word. I mean, when we see what's going on in Texas, which obviously is a proxy for the reproductive rights of women in vast swaths of the country, when we see how transgender people, particularly trans kids, are being targeted and their physical and mental health is being threatened in so many states, it's hard to think of nomenclature and, what we call ourselves as being all that important. Who cares what we call each other? We need to get organized to fight these laws. At the same time, it worries me that so many young people are uncomfortable with that label. I mean, that says something. I came across a 2018 survey, so it's a little old, and it's also of British adults. But it shocked me so much, I think it's worth mentioning. So 1 in 3 people, 1 in 3, men and women, in white-collar jobs called themselves a feminist. That means 2 in 3 didn't, while only 1 in 5 in a group that included manual workers, pensioners, casual workers, and the unemployed, took on that description for themselves. So that's mind-boggling. But then the second part of it is that 8 out of 10 people in both those groups said they believed that men and women should be equal in every way.
I mean, that's exactly where I get confused. I mean, like, we believe in the meaning, but we can't bring ourselves to say the word. I mean, this is something I ran into like way back in college, where I would be thinking, I'm like, oh, I'm just so smart, uber feminist over here because I was big in the English department. And I'd be like talking to guys like, I don't even know where. And I'd be like, so are you a feminist? And they'd be like, no, man. I'd be like, oh, well, don't you believe that women and men should be equal? And they'd be like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, boom. So you're a feminist, thinking like I got them. Like, I don't know. But this is something I've always just been so mind boggled by.
I know. And I guess it shows, again, that there's something about this word that turns people off. And, in the case of lower income people rejecting that label, I remember also something that Danielle said on last week's episode, that the women's movement has never fought hard enough for low-wage women, for working class women. So people's rejection of the term feminist isn't necessarily about the underlying philosophy. It can be about what the women's movement as it's perceived, because again, there really isn't a women's movement. There's lots of people doing stuff all over the place, but it's the perception of what the women's movement has focused on that I think puts some people off. And actually in that case, it's really hard to disagree. That is a failure. But I see another example in the last few years. Some women, mostly younger women, but not entirely, have preferred to call themselves queer rather than lesbian. Now, there are lots of reasons. Some are non-binary or generally moving away from the gender binary. Some want a term that acknowledges that they're attracted to all kinds of people, maybe except cis men. And some are just distancing themselves from what they see as the failures of old school lesbians. And I'm sure there's still other reasons. I don't mean to suggest that that's, a comprehensive list of why people are avoiding that label. But again, does it matter? Well, it's an indication of failure. It's an opportunity for growth, for change. At the same time, fight the real enemy. Other lesbians are very rarely the real enemy. And as I started off by saying, this isn't a top-down movement with leaders and chapters and dues. How would you ever get people to abandon the term feminist and find another better label? It's not like there's another term that a whole bunch of people are pushing and we're just, waiting for the word to, take off our feminist badge and put on this new one. So yeah, it's frustrating. And the lack of comfort with the term suggests we do have to do better. But the things we have to do better about aren't about finding a better term. They're voting so that Republicans don't get to nominate all these conservative Supreme Court justices. We have to oppose these terrible pieces of legislation that are being pushed across the country. We should have fought harder against things like welfare reform. We shouldn't have allowed Merrick Garland's nomination to the Supreme Court to just be ignored. But we didn't. So, next round. But that's the way that we fix the image problem, is to take better action, I think.
Do you think the word matters? Like, should we just be like, all right, t-shirts or no, I'm calling myself a feminist, even with all the messy accoutrements that come with it? Or do you think we need to find a way towards some type of fresh start?
I don't know. I do want to remember how radical it once was to say, I'm a feminist. I'm also thinking back again to what we were discussing earlier, how in the 70s, fear of being called a lesbian, being perceived of as a lesbian, having somebody just think it of you was, pushed some women to take very unfeminist stands and to ignore a section of the movement, a very active section of the movement as it happens, and also just a big chunk of womankind, of humanity. They out of fear of a label, they push those women out of the mainstream feminist movement. So obviously words have meaning, words have baggage. They have different baggage in 2023 than they had in 1973. But I don't know, it feels like a useful lesson. We shouldn't forget how the kind of derangement about words can cause groups to fall apart. And we're still seeing that kind of weaponization of words and ideas and fear, especially around trans issues and gender issues. But again, it comes back to me to what is the alternative? Women have taken on new terms: womanist, radical queer, lesbian feminist, others. But what's the alternative generic term for a mainstream feminist? If we don't use the F word, what do we call ourselves?
We could always try to reclaim the C word.
Cheyna! That's the only C word I'm going to take on.
June, since it's our last show, you requested that we bring back an old favorite, Endorsements, where we talk about something that brings us joy in the mess of 2023. I was more than happy to oblige. June, you go first. What are you endorsing?
Oh, so I made this plea because I read the most amazing book last week. It's one that I saw on, best of lists, and I was like, well, I guess. And they were right. It is amazing. It's called We Were Once a Family, A Story of Love, Death, and Child Removal in America by Roxanna Asgarian, a Texas writer. It starts with the awful story of the Harts, 2 white women who adopted 6 Black and mixed-race children, mistreated them terribly, and eventually killed them and themselves, sending their car off a cliff. So that's the terrible place where the book starts. But it just goes really deep into the systems that allow that kind of tragedy to happen, especially why it's so easy to remove kids from Black families, why it's so hard for Black families to get their children back. It's just beautifully written, exquisitely researched. It is a heartbreaking, enraging book, but oh my God, it's stunning. It's an amazing achievement. I'm in awe of Roxanna Asgarian and how she wrote this book. It's just fantastic.
It is an incredible book. And we actually had Roxanna Asgarian on The Waves back in March.
Oh my goodness, I missed that episode.
Yes. So if you're finishing up this episode and feeling a little bit sad and want some more waves, go back and listen to that interview. It was a really great interview with Daisy Rosario and Roxanna. So for my final recommendation, I'm going to be selfish on 2 fronts. First, I'm going to recommend my book that came out in November. It's a true crime collection of cases called Between Two Wars, about really fascinating people and events that took place between the end of the Civil War and the start of World War II. There's a train heist, gambling, spies, yes, 1 serial killer, but it's about so much more than murder. So if you're doing any last-minute holiday shopping, I think it's a good get. I also want to push June's book, which is coming out next year. June, why don't you just give us the quick byline of your book that's coming out next year?
Yes, so it'll be out May 28 in the United States and a couple of weeks later in Britain. It's called A Place of Our Own, 6 Spaces That Shaped Queer Women's Culture. Yeah, I'm very excited. I just made the last tweaks to the proof, so it's kind of out of my hands. I just have to let the world know about it now. But yeah, I hope people like it. And I just checked, Cheyna, and I was so glad to see that your book is available in the UK. So I am going to go out and get that ASAP. It somehow escaped my attention. What's your other recommendation? It sounded like you had another one in mind.
I do. It's the winter time, so I have to recommend an old movie. It's called The Lady Vanishes, and it's absolutely perfect for winter. It takes place during like this big winter storm on a train. It's an Alfred Hitchcock movie that has had a few iterations, but I recommend the 1938 original starring Michael Redgrave and Margaret Lockwood. I don't know if recommending a Hitchcock film is the most feminist thing ever, but it is based on a book written by a woman, Ethel Lena White, and it's about a woman on a train being gaslit into believing that this other woman that she had met earlier and can no longer find never existed at all. I mean, there's some topical themes there for you. It's it's thrilling. It's funny. Michael Redgrave will make you swoon despite one of the worst stage fights I've ever seen in my life. It's a true delight. Just get cozy, get a nice beverage, and curl up to the Lady Vanishes.
Cheyna, I have to tell you, Margaret Lockwood is one of my absolute heroes. Everything she's in is fantastic. And I love the way that she's always styled. Like, she's always in a lot of tweeds. Yes. And I love that. I can't believe I've lived in Scotland now for 18 months. I still don't have a full Margaret Lockwood set of tweeds. But the day is coming, I'm telling you. If I watch this movie again, I'm sure that will, set me over the edge.
June, the goat of the waves, thank you so much for joining us here for our final episode of The Waves.
Oh, thank you for having me, Cheyna. It's a sad day, but also what a fantastic show. Well, let's just spend a bit of time reflecting on just the amazing debates and stories that the show has covered. Thanks so much for the work that you've done on the show these last few years.
That's our show this week. The Waves is produced by myself, Cheyna Roth, with help from Vic Whitley Berry, who has been indispensable as we've brought the Waves to the finish line. Daisy Rosario is senior supervising producer. Alicia Montgomery is vice president of audio. And that's it for The Waves. This is our last episode as we go into suspension. I just want to say that it has been an absolute honor and privilege to have worked on this show. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Hey everybody, it's Tim Heidecker. You know me, Tim and Eric, Bridesmaids, and Fantastic Four. I'd like to personally invite you to listen to Office Hours Live with me and my co-hosts, DJ Doug Pound.
Hello.
And Vic Berger.
Howdy.
Every week we bring you laughs, fun, games, and lots of other surprises. It's live. We take your Zoom calls. Music. We love having fun. Excuse me?
Songs. Vic said something.
Music. Songs.
Music.
I like having fun. I like to laugh. I like to meet people who can make me laugh. Please subscribe now.